Hey there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for a brand new video, and this time we'll talk about Automapper and how we implement Automapper in an ASP.NET Core application. Now, one of the previous videos that we did here was regarding on why we actually need to use DTOs in our APIs. And if you haven't watched that video and are not 100% clear with the concept of DTOs, please take just a few moments and take a look at that video. You might find it in the description of this one or on a card here somewhere on the screen. So just go ahead and do that. Also because actually we're starting this video from exactly the same code base where we left off last time. So if you want to understand the entire context of this very basic application that we have, then just please go and take a look there. So at that point, we actually saw how important it is to use DTOs in our APIs. And what we have done, we have implemented some DTOs for the book DTO, as we can see here, and we have implemented a DTO for the author DTO. Or in this case, we named it book author DTO because it is the author, as we need to display it when we actually get a book or a list of books, which is not all the information about the author, but only what is actually important to us. So that's the whole concept of the DTO. Now, the problem is that in order for this to work, we had to write here some code in the controller to manually create actually the mapping from our book model, which comes actually from our domain model, and our book DTO. And as our book DTO also contained the list or an I collection actually of author DTOs or book author DTO, we also had to manually create those entities and add them to the book authors list. And then, of course, return the book DTOs object. Now, as we can see here, we have written just quite a few lines of code just to be able to return our DTOs in our API responses. And there has to be for sure a better way to do that. And there is. And this way is called Automapper, which is a library that virtually everyone is using when it comes to mapping domain models to other type of entities. It could be DTOs, like in our case, but if you're building a full MVC application with views, then you might also want to map from your domain model to view models and things like that. So Automapper is really an awesome library, and we have a lot of use cases for that. Now let's go ahead and take a look on how we can implement Automapper in our ASP.NET Core Web API. Of course, the first thing to do here is we need to install the package. So if we go to manage NuGet packages, and here we can browse for Automapper. And here you will probably see two packages. You will see the Automapper package, which is the core let's say functionality, or that contains the core functionality of Automapper. And then we have this Automapper extensions Microsoft dependency injection, which is actually a package that allows us to register Automapper as a service in our ASP.NET Core application. Now, if you're using an ASP.NET Core application like we use in this case, because we're creating a web API, then actually it's enough if you install this package here, which is the Automapper extensions Microsoft dependency injection, because this one will also include the core Automapper project. So let's go on and install that. Okay, and now we actually have that installed. Now, the next thing to do, of course, is as we have installed this dependency injection package, this means that, of course, we have to register Automapper here in our services. And that's actually quite easy to do. We just have to call services and add Automapper. Automapper is an extension method from the package that we just installed, and it's very, very easy to add it. The only thing is that you need to provide here is actually the assemblies, or an assembly or an array of assemblies where Automapper should look for mapping profiles. Now we'll just see in 1 second what actually those mapping profiles are. So in order to do this, it's actually enough to just specify a class from that assembly, and Automapper will automatically look in that specific assembly. And then this means that actually what we need to do here is specify here, for instance, type of startup. because we are right now here in the startup. This is the assembly that we are into currently. So Automapper will then look here in this project for those mapping profiles. Now, so this is all that we need to do for the service registration. So it's nothing really complicated. It's actually quite easy. Now, the next thing and the core part of this is that in order for Automapper to work, we need to create profiles. Profiles are nothing else than some mappings. So we tell Automapper, if you see an entity of this type, then you need to map it to an entity of this type. So we have to create those maps so that Automapper knows exactly how it should do the mappings. So to do that, let's create a new folder here, and we'll call this folder profiles. And let's add here a new profile. So add a new class, and let's call it book profile. And then profiles for Automapper are actually very, very easy and straightforward. So the only actual thing that you need to do is just inherit a profile from Automapper. So we need to add the using for that. And then in the constructor, you can just simply provide the different maps that you need. And to provide the maps, there's actually this create map method, which comes from Automapper, and it's generic. It's a generic one. So we have to specify two things here. So first, we always have to specify the source. In our case, in this case, is book, and then, but then it doesn't know exactly where to look for it. So we will have to add a using for that. So in our models. So once again, the first thing that we have to provide here is the source, and then the second thing that we need to provide is the destination. And in this case, we want to map a book to a book DTO. Of course, we will also have to add the using here, and now everything is okay. Now, the very nice thing about Automapper is that in most cases, or in a lot of cases, let's say maybe not most, but in a lot of them, actually this is everything that you need to do, because Automapper is relying on conventions in order to do the mappings. What do I mean by that? So let's take a look here in this book class, which is our domain model. So we see here that we have here a property ID, we have here a property title, and we have this iCollection property that is named authors. So if we take a look at the book DTO, we see that we have a property that is named ID. So exactly like it's the same type and the same name that we actually have in our domain model. Then we have this string title, which is once again the same. It's the same time. It's the same type and the same name as we have in our domain model. And then we have this iCollection of book author DTO, which is not of the same type, but it is of the same name. Now, the thing is here that the conventions of Automapper is it always looks in the source and the destination. And if it sees properties that have the same type and the same name, it will just automatically do the mapping from one to the other. So from the source to the destination. So this means that actually this is very, very easy to implement, because as said, in most of the cases, based on this type of conventions, Automapper is doing actually all the work that it needs to do. However, if we go back to our profile class here, one thing is that there are some cases where you might want to map from book DTO as a source to a book as a destination. So in this case, you can register a new map, or you can simply use the reverse map method that creates also a reverse map from book DTO as source to a book as destination. And that should be it for the book itself. But the book DTO also contains, as we see, a list of book or an iCollection of book author DTOs. Now our book model has actually a list of or an iCollection of author. So there is a difference between author and author DTO, but in this case, this difference relates to the book context. So when we want to get a book, how should the author be displayed? So in that case, we can go here back to this profile, and we can simply create a new map. So if we say here create map, then here what we want to do is from the source author, to the destination book author DTO. And if we want, well, we probably won't need a reverse map here, but okay, we don't need it, so we don't put it. Okay, so now we also create a map for those two. Now, the idea is that theoretically right now, what should happen is that Automapper should also be able, once again by conventions, to also, when it sees here, for instance, that it has an I collection of author, that it has to transform to an I collection of book author DTO, it will actually look at the mapping that we have created and it will do the same things by convention. So for each item in this collection, it will create actually a new book author's DTO. And if we look into this book author DTO, it will do exactly the same. It will compare, do we have in the domain model, like the property first name? Yes, we have it. So it will automatically be mapped. Do we have a last name property? Yes, we have it, and it will automatically be mapped. And the same, of course, goes also for bio. So this means that right now with this basic setup that we have done in this book profile, theoretically everything should work. So we just have to wire things up together. And to do that, we just need to go to this book controller. And the only thing that we need to do is, remember, we have added Automapper to the dependency injection container in ASP.NET Core. So this means that we can simply inject it in this controller here, but we can inject it wherever we would need it. So let's have a private read-only, and it will always inject an IMapper. Let's call it mapper. Of course, we will also need here the using for that. So let's add Automapper, and this should work right now. And of course, we need to inject it in the constructor, once again, an IMapper. So Automapper always injects an IMapper, an instance of type, or that implements the interface IMapper. And let's call this mapper and assign everything that we need here. So mapper equals mapper, and that should do it. Now that we have injected our mapper, the only thing that we need to do here is actually to move all this work that we have done here in Automapper. And to do that, let's simply just delete everything here, except the books that we get actually from the DB context. Of course, right now we have this error because we don't have the book DTOs anymore, but let's do it this way. So var book DTOs equals mapper.map. So this is how we use the mapper. We just use this generic map method. And as a generic type, here we specify the destination. So we want to map to book DTO, actually to a list of book DTO. And what do we want to map? The books. So this is the destination, this is the source. Now you might ask yourself, okay, but here we have a list, but in the profiles we have actually defined only the mapping from book to book DTO itself. Now Automapper knows how to work around that. So if it sees a list of this type, there's no problem. Automapper will still do all the work. And now the only thing that we can do here is then return book DTOs, and everything should work normally. Of course, we could here use this mapper.map also as an argument to this OK return method, and it would still work, but I wanted us to have an overview about what we actually do. So first we get the books. So once again, this contains a collection or a list of book, which is our domain model, and then we use Automapper to map it to a list of book DTO, which is our DTO model. So let's run this application again right now. It should start just in a few seconds. Probably it will be on the other screen, of course, but I'll bring it over. No problem with that. So let's use this method again, try it out, execute. And we actually see that we have exactly the same result as previously, but what we have done is actually we have replaced, I guess, 15 lines of code with actually only one single line of code by implementing Automapper. But before we wrap this up, I just want to go through another very nice thing here about Automapper, and this is a use case that you will have also a lot when you are using on real production applications. So let's try to run this again. Execute, and let's see the result. So now you see that in the result, we actually have here this list of authors that contains a first name and a last name, and then of course the bio. But what if you get a requirement that to the API, you should only return a name that would contain both the first name and the last name, of course. So we need to have just one single name property instead of two different first name and last name properties. Now you might say, hey, but this could be a little bit tricky to implement because right now we don't have actually this one-to-one property namings between what we have in our model and what we have in our destination in the Automapper profile. But the cool thing about this is that we can actually configure that, and Automapper is very, very open to extend the way that actually properties and names are mapped from the source to the destination. And here, for instance, let's go on the create map for from author to a book author DTO, because this is actually what we need to change. So in this case, we can just concatenate further methods, and there is for member. And this is a method that you can use to simply define a custom mapping for a certain property. What member means or refers to is a property of the source. And here this one takes, actually it's very nice, I would say, because it takes a lot of actions. So first of all, we have to specify as an action, so actually as a lambda or a delegate, we have to specify, okay, so for member source, we have to specify which property do we actually want. Sorry, we have to start with the destination, sorry for that. Because we have to specify what property do we want to custom map. So we have here destination dot, in order to do this, we need to change the book author DTO, and instead of having these two properties, we will have only one property. Public string name get set. And now we can go back to our book profile, and here we say that for the destination member, and we say that for the name, because this is what we want to do the custom mapping for. Then we can provide an options argument, which is also an action. So then we can use options, and here we have map from, and here we have to specify from where do we actually want to map this destination property. And here as a parameter, we get the source once again as an action, and we can say that we want to map from source dot first name plus, let's add a space, and then plus source dot last name. But the cool thing about this is that this here takes in an action. So you could theoretically replace this with a custom method private that you defined here in this class, in which you can do some more extensive logic about how you actually want to map your property. In this case, for us, it was very simple because we just had to concatenate this. But here is how we can extend the default conventions of Automapper and actually add our own logic on how this type of mappings should actually be done. And we can do this only for the members, for the properties, for instance, here that was this name, that actually needs a custom mapping. For all other properties, we don't have to touch them, the conventions will still work. So bio will still be there. Now, actually, that's it. This is how we do some custom mapping. And here, if we run this application again, just in a second, I guess it will do exactly the same thing, only that right now the author would have only a name property, you see, and the bio. And that's how powerful and how easy it is to work with Automapper when it comes to translating our domain models to our DTOs. It's very, very, very easy. So as a summary, what you have to do in ASP.NET Core first is to install the Automapper dependency injection package. This is specific for ASP.NET Core. Then the next step is to add the Automapper to the configure services, and for that we have an extension method which is called add Automapper, and here we can specify, for instance, a type which is or we have to specify a type within an assembly where Automapper should look for those profiles. And in this case, we just specified here the startup because this startup is here in our assembly, which is called using DTOs. So this means that Automapper right now will scan this entire project for classes that actually implement this profile class. And then it will use the mappings that we will define here in order to do the mappings. So that would also be the third step after adding Automapper to the dependency injection container. We just have to create the profiles, and it's very easy to do that. Just inherit from profile, and in the constructor you can create the maps. You can then create also a reverse map if you want to map from source book DTO to a destination book. But right now we are mapping from a source book to a destination book DTO. And here is also how you can override conventions and write your custom mapping logic using this for-member method. And then in your controller, you can just simply inject Automapper like you inject all the services, and then always use the mapper to do the mappings. And voila, that's it. Automapper works, and it helps us to save a lot of lines of code and time that we would need to invest in writing our own mappings for, or to translate actually from our domain model to our DTOs. So that's it. I hope this video was useful for you, and I hope right now it's very, very clear how Automapper can help us and how powerful it really is. We have gone through the different steps that we need to configure it. If you think that content was right for you and think that others might benefit from this content, then just don't be shy and feel free to share it with your peers or on your social networks. Also, if you want to add something, if you have questions, or if you want to discuss something with me, then just once again, don't be shy and drop a comment. That would be highly appreciated. And of course, a thumbs up for this video if you enjoyed it, and the subscribe button. That's very, very important in order to keep up to date with all new content that we try to create as quick as possible. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.